Now, when you decided to tell the rest of your family, if I recall from our conversation, it didn't actually happen for several years after. Um, can you tell me a little bit about that?
So I had briefly told very close family members when I first had my my memories come back to me. I had told them very briefly. We didn't really dig into it. Um we didn't discuss it fully or really dive into um to realize how it had really affected me. So it was a very surface conversation when I first started having these memories. After um, my triggering point that really fully brought everything into perspective for me back in December 2019, that was the point where I knew that I needed to speak about this more in depth with my close family members in order to find any type of peace when it came to this subject. I knew that there was no possible way for me to heal until I was able to be seen how I felt I deserved to be by those who loved me the most. I felt like for a long time I was, like I said before, I was treated as just, oh, Kristen's just being Kristen. And it took me a while to get to that point where I really came to realize that this is where my healing would begin. Um, so at that point, I had decided that I was going to sit down with both of my parents. I was ready to completely release all of it and to really make it known how I had been affected. Um, so I was ready for that. I sat down with my mom in February of 2020. I had a very deep conversation with her. I poured I poured a lot of it out during that conversation with my mom. Um, from there, I was ready to go ahead and have the conversation with my dad as well, because the relationship with my dad was really the one that suffered the most throughout my adolescence, through my teens and early 20s. Um, I'm able to look back now, and I think I so desired to be protected and wasn't, that I lashed out at my paternal figure. I feel like that is a very consistent thing um, uh, for victims of abuse that have gone through similar situations. It's hard to not, in that moment, um, feel failed, feel like you have been failed. And I felt that, and I was ready to not be seen a certain way anymore. So I opened up. I was ready to open up with my dad. At that point, the pandemic came about, which was great. It halted my conversation because I very much wanted to have this conversation in person. I Like I stated before, I have never wanted to place blame, shame, guilt, responsibility on any party ex- except for the person who abused me. The guilt and the responsibility lays upon nobody except for my abuser. Um, and I definitely want to just make that very aware. But at the same time, I desired to have this conversation. I wanted to be in the same room with my parents. I wanted to be able to sit together in my sorrow. I wanted to have them feel my tears and for me to feel theirs physically. Um, I just really held on to the fact that it needed to be something that was done sitting face to face next to each other, not on a computer screen. Also, just for the reasoning that, as we've dealt with many times, technology is so, you never know when you're going to cut out, when something's going to glitch, a lag. I just thought it was going to be very less meaningful if it had to happen this way. So I put it on hold, and I still, throughout 2020, I was still feeling a lot of peace, knowing, okay, I'm going to have this conversation. I'm going to get people to finally understand me for who I am. I'm going to get that validation, and I can wait for it, and I'm okay. I felt very okay. At the same time, I was unfortunately made to realize how much my behavior had affected other people very close to me. And I had realized that it became aware to me even more so that I was still being viewed as a tantrum giving, unreasonable, selfish, blow up, explosive, bratty type of personality. That was made aware to me from a different situation that happened in 2020. And at that point, I realized that really the only way to heal was to expose myself, to show myself for who I am. So I went ahead and I waited a little while to sit down and have a conversation with everybody involved, because in hopes that I would be able to do it in person. But when I became aware that the pandemic was not coming to an end, we were able to have that type of family style meeting online, and I was able to pour it all out and explain how I had been feeling my whole entire life, basically. And with that, which you had mentioned earlier, came the rewriting of pasts, both shared and personal. And I think that's where I am, and where people who are very close to me are at now, is rewriting. You have to go back and rewrite every single situation, basically, that has happened under new terms. You have to realize, okay, this experience happened, and Kristen overreacted, and I thought she was being a bitch, but underneath it was all of this, these years and years and years of being terrified and dealing with trauma by herself, and coming to grasp and understand the reality behind situations has been difficult, I believe, for everyone involved. But at the same time, that is what I needed to happen for others, for me to be able to heal.
And I think that is a really important place to understand that this story doesn't end. We call it survivor, and I hope that we get a better term than that. And I think that's probably the term chosen by Kristen. Now I'm going to redirect one part, and I hope I'm not putting words into your mouth, but I'm just based on how you're telling the story. You mentioned that people have to go back and rewrite. And here's the reality. It sounds like you're aware that you have fault even in trauma of these interactions. Now, there is reason that affected those, but it's not like you are sitting here unreasonably saying, well, I'm absolved now. Am I putting words into your mouth there?
You are not at all. I hold myself fully accountable, and am very open to any conversation where I may have hurt someone by my actions, where I may have unreasonably blown up, where I may have said something damaging. I understand where I was coming from and why I have acted certain ways, but in no way do I use that as an absolution for my actions at all. It just gives understanding, I believe. I think that that's what I so yearned for to have was understanding of who I truly am. Like I said, I wanted people to see my heart instead of seeing my stone exterior that I built around myself.
When you find yourself in a place where you're not being believed, that unbelief, and it is a lot for somebody to have to believe, especially when it's an imperfect memory. So there's a lot of opportunities to discredit. All right, that is always going to be the case. And there is the ability to accept or not accept the truth. So what, as my experience has been, is the more unbelieved I am, the less grace I'm willing to give for the other person to believe me. Meaning, oh, you don't believe me at all? Well, now I am zero care about your perspective. And I look at that, I realize that that's a trauma response. I'm trying to protect myself because I've exposed myself, I've gotten hurt. I've had that second now trauma. I've had that second pain on top of pain. And so now I close in and I protect myself. And so that's just my personal experience with no detail. But I want you to understand that as you go through this, that's probably why listening and trusting the story is so important, because the compounding is so quick and so rapid. And if there's something you feel that person needs to hear, the day they're probably not ready to hear it is the day they finally decided to divulge information that they've been holding for a long time. It might have to come a year later, a month later, but the day of, I can almost guarantee you it might be the only one of the worst days to try to offer a defense. Not only that, if you listen, and again, some people might be coming to the table fully ready to just attack. That might be it. Or not even to attack, but to get vindication. I need you to admit that you were wrong. That's how I went to the table in my scenario with a parent. And then when you get, well, what do you want from me? It's like all of a sudden that is a valid question. What did I want? However, at the moment, there's this thing of understanding that if the person's coming to the table saying, listen, I'm not blaming you, you're still going to feel bad for your role or things that you wish you had controlled or had control of. That is not, it's not about defending ourselves, believe it or not. When I make a mistake as a parent, a massive one, I can either try to defend myself or I can go to aid my child. Those are the two options. I've experienced parents who protect themselves. Parent that, especially as a dad, who cannot, like being a dad, I was raised to believe that dad is effectively God on earth. When in fact, actually, what I've started to learn is that a dad is actually the first example of how to follow God on earth. That's how I perceive it. Is I am the first one to be an example of how to be not the most important person in the house, and I'm still learning that, and I'm trying. So that was a long detachment, but I think it also, again, it gives us that little bit of breath, so you can understand as somebody who has traveled through navigating a interaction with family and a trauma, it's going to be imperfect. Kristen, on the other hand, in my opinion, as somebody from the outside, is really doing a fantastic job. So listen, I'm always going to cheerlead here, but Kristen, you're doing just wonderfully. So thank you.
Well, and that is one of the main issues I have dealt with in finding my own peace and my own true healing in this has been putting aside the feelings of others. I have had to distance myself from people or situations that I felt negatively about. And for my own personal healing, I needed space. I needed to protect myself at all costs, and that meant holding people at a distance for quite some time. And in that, I caused people pain, and I hurt people without meaning to, by distancing myself and by protecting myself. And that is something that I am still grappling with and trying to fully figure out how to deal with and to come to terms with and how to approach that situation. Because for so long, I felt like I may have seemed selfish through those years of just burying my trauma. I may have seemed selfish, but honestly, I neglected myself so much during that time. And now I am coming to the point where I can fully stand my ground and know whether something is healthy for me to be involved in, maybe a conversation, a relationship, a experience. I am aware of when I need to step back and when I need to protect myself, even if it may be at the cost of someone else's feelings.
We're coming up to the last question in the series about who you were in your heart. And it's interesting we've gotten this to now. And I'm not asking about the present day, because a lot of this is actually sharing that. You are sharing your heart with us today. And I want everybody else to understand that. That's why I'm not going to ask, oh, well, we're like, who are you in your heart today? We should have a very good picture of that right now. If I struggle to believe you, how does that affect you and how you're going to tell the story next time?
Thankfully, I have yet to not be believed. I have so far, anyone who I have told or shared my experience with, no one has not believed me. The issue that I had more so than being believed was um, that understanding of why I responded the way I responded in many instances, and that understanding of how this framed me. And maybe you could even word it as the belief or the believing that my trauma did change me this drastically. I think that at this point, I so much want to advocate and tell my story, because I know that if I had been able to open up earlier and talk about it earlier and just had open conversation, I would have saved myself, my loved ones, my family, my friends, anybody probably, honestly, who came in contact with me during those really tumultuous years. I believe if I had had open conversation from the very beginning, all of that could have been easily avoided. So it's not so much for me as much as being believed, just because in my personal experience, I have not dealt with that. But I know obviously how many people are not believed. I sent you the article yesterday that I wrote about my sexual abuse, and the time that I opened up with a group of my girlfriends was when someone else had not been believed. I wasn't going to share anything. At that point, I had not shared anything with anybody except for my now husband, my mom, and my very closest friend. But once the conversation started with this other person and it was seen and voiced that she was not believed by other people that were in our company at the time, I knew that I had to speak up. I was unable to listen to anyone that is a sexual abuse victim not be believed. I could not stand by and listen to someone doubt another woman who was voicing the trauma she had experienced. That's just not something that I'll ever stand by and allow.
So the last person we're going to address, Kristen, is who you were in your heart. And we're going to do the best we can here. because it takes, this is just, to me, this is the hardest one to kind of wrestle with, and I'm interested to see how you answer it. But who were you in your heart, say the day after you were assaulted?
This one is definitely the hardest to answer. Mostly because I clearly blacked out. My mind blacked out so much. But in those early times, looking back now, and thinking back about those dreams that were triggered from my sexual abuse, and in those moments, I think I was scared. I think I was just mostly scared. I have always felt very alone, even and some people probably are gonna not be able to believe this, especially because of the person I was in high school. I mean, looking back at it now, I can realize what it was, but at the time, I'm sure no one else did. I was voted biggest class partier in high school. I mean, I was very loud, and I was very outspoken. I always had my core clique of friends around me. Um, but I always felt alone. I never felt like anyone understood me at all. And I think that's mostly what I felt in those very early days, was a lot of confusion and almost abandonment. Um and that's hard for me to even say. And I mentioned this to you, Chris, before when we were speaking the other night. It's so hard for me to say that I was abandoned or that I was neglected, especially in terms when it comes to my parents. I obviously painted the picture of how I view and how I have always viewed my mom. And I still hold very tight to that. So it's hard for me to say that I was abandoned when they were always there. I never wanted for anything ever except for protection in this case. And so it's really hard to, for me today even, it's almost like you go back to that automatic gaslighting of yourself, where I can say it wasn't that bad. I had a loving family. It wasn't that bad. I never needed anything that I didn't get, but I needed therapy, and I needed conversation, and to be heard, and to be listened to, and to be acknowledged and held, and and to just have a feeling of safety, because I so quickly tried to get it from other places that were negatively impacting me. So I think that very early on, I felt abandoned and scared, alone.
So, as I hear, it's very hard to define the Kristen that was those days and really even years after. I don't know. I mean, really, it's hard to know who you were exactly in your heart because that person was so conflicted. But I think there's one thing that's very clear. And again, I'm speaking into the situation now. So I apologize because I am putting words into this story. This is my perspective. But it sounds like you were well aware that the person that you were displaying was not who you were in your heart, and you were trying to figure out who that was.
That is the underlying thing that I dealt with my whole entire adolescence and teenage years. I think I was constantly at war within myself because my morals and ethics are very, very strong. I had the same set of morals now that I had at a very young age. At a young age, I had a very strong faith in God. I had a very close relationship with God. I was very involved in our church youth group. And during this time, I pushed back on all those feelings of safety because almost like they were superficial safety nets, I feel like. I knew within myself that there was something deeper that was wrong and that there was something that really needed to be addressed. I knew it within my heart. I fully knew this my whole entire life. And to the point that I would have these these experiences happen where I would blow up and I would completely act irrationally in any given situation, and I would just fly off the handle. And afterwards I would reflect and I would question myself. Why did I act like that? Why am I like this? Why am I so moody? Why am I such a bitch? Why can't I accept love and and be kind? I really couldn't grasp why I was unable to present how I truly felt inside just because everything else was drowned out by this this overwhelming amount of trauma and pain and feelings of abandonment. It just drowned everything else of who I truly was. But in my mind and in my heart, I was fully aware that that was happening. But I also didn't know why, because I wasn't purposefully hiding my the sexual abuse to anyone. I wasn't purposely withholding it. It wasn't there for me either. So there was just so much confusion as to why I was the way I was for a long time.
Is there anything else that you would like to share at the moment? Because this has been, I mean, you really have done a fantastic job, and I really want to applaud that, not just superficially, but I am absolutely honored to be able to facilitate this. This is the type of thing that I treasure in my career, and to be able to use it in a situation like this with a friend, with a close group, is just a rare honor. So thank you for allowing me to do this.
Thank you, Chris. Um, if we are wrapping up, I think one thing, and I think it might be good actually to leave it kind of with a question. And I posed this question to you as well. And it ties in the book that we've been reading, Talking to Strangers, very well. We talked before a little bit about the Sandusky and Brock Turner case. And with the Sandusky case, we saw that an assistant coach actually walked in and saw this sexual violence happening. This man walked into the locker room and saw it with his own eyes. He saw Sandusky with a young boy who he believed to be 10 or 12. He saw them both naked in the locker room, and he heard noises, and he he knew in his heart, he knew that what was going on was sexual abuse and was not okay. He decided to kind of view Sandusky as someone else, I believe. And it was harder for him to point a finger and say, that's wrong, and to stop what was happening. He didn't stop what was happening. He didn't walk in and interrupt what was going on. He walked away. Whereas we go to the Brock Turner case, where it is a late teen, early 20 man and female, and she is basically being raped by a dumpster. And automatically, two bystanders who came up on the situation stopped it and immediately knew something was wrong. My questioning is why we as a society are able to explain things away when they seem so horrific. We are so often unable to accept that someone could be that evil, but we very quickly understand and believe when a teenage girl is raped drunkenly. I feel like there's something there that needs to be discussed and needs to be noted, that we're able to cloud ourselves, we're able to cloud our minds when it's something just so horrific, when it seems like I had written in my notes that default to truth becomes an issue when we are forced to choose between two alternatives, one of which is likely and the other of which is impossible to imagine. It's so much easier to be able to say, oh, those kids are just playing around. Oh, that little boy and little girl who are family friends and are sharing a blanket while we watch a movie, they're not doing anything inappropriate. We so easily go that way because it's so hard to imagine anything else. That's what we need to stop. And I feel like it's hard because it almost always puts you on this defense or offense, actually, where you're just ready to point a finger so easily. But I think that it really needs to be examined how we look at and think of different situations when they are so horrendous. This person who had abused me later opened up partially to his own parents about it with no prompting. He, from what I know, he gave up information willingly without being asked or pressed about it because he did feel guilt. If you're able to feel guilt that soon after, you know something's wrong. If and as well as if this person came forward and volunteered this information knowing that what he had done was wrong, that was all the more reason for me to be approached by the adults in my life. That showed even more that something had happened. It was wrong. It was inappropriate. The perpetrator understands that it was wrong. We need to do something about it. That's how I view that it should have happened when someone is so seemingly so aware of their actions.
As a male who has failed drastically here, and whether it be high school, college age, a inappropriate slap, if you will. So that's inappropriate touching. It's sexual touching. It's like, oh well, it's just nice and light. Well, I don't know, because I have seen a woman turn around and look at me with that look of absolute horror, and I had no idea I had done anything wrong. Okay. There are other things as well, and here's where, as a man, like, I can sit here and be an advocate, but man, I absolutely, the first person I have to hold accountable is myself. Now, this is not my time to share these things, and some of these things are not mine to share with anybody other than direct people. What I can say is that the easiest path is to protect the truth that we want to be the truth. And that is why things like in the current situation in the governor's office, the state overwhelmingly, 35%, only 35% of the state wants him to resign. And the reality is a lot of that has to do with males who see these truths come to light or these stories come to light and they go, what does she want? That's particularly when there's power. Now, this is different, and it's another conversation. I think, Kristen, I don't know where your thoughts are, but I wondered if you did have any thoughts that would help us in that idea that when the perpetrator has this power, whether they are being a predatory on purpose or what innocently predatory or as predatory as everybody else, no more predatory than everybody else. How do we address the fact that there's no such thing as everybody was doing it? That's not real. It's a lie.
The only real way to combat these issues is exactly what we're doing here today, is talking about it, is putting a light on it, making more people, men in particular, aware that almost every single woman you come in contact with has either been a victim of sexual abuse or has a friend or close family member who they are very close with and know personally who has been a victim. I think that advocacy and just all of us taking the time to listen to each other and to understand better and to learn from one another, I think that's the only way that we can reasonably stop these things from happening. Because as you said, with just the seemingly innocent, inappropriate slap, I can't tell you, I honestly cannot tell you how many times I have been touched inappropriately by someone who is a male and felt uncomfortable, but never said anything. I think that every female, especially ones in, I mean, and maybe that's bias of me to say, that may be ageist of me to say, and I'm sure it is, but I feel like it was very common and normal growing up in high school and middle school for that to happen. The quick flinging of bra straps or slapping of a butt when you walk by, any of that. We don't find a problem with that. We don't deem that as sexual abuse or sexual violence, when that is exactly what it is. If if there is not consent given for a person to touch you, that's that right there is sexual abuse. That's sexual violence. That is not okay. And I feel like education on this and conversation about it is the only way that we have any hope of changing the narrative.
To that point, as men hear these things, because what you're talking about, listen, go back and watch a couple of movies or a sitcom from the 50s, 60s, 70s. This has been the way, but we are literally having to undo a history, and it starts with those of us by addressing the ones that are alive, and we keep on working our way back. I hope that our mothers will get to speak. That my mother generation, there are many women I refer to as mother, but obviously I have my own first, and there are so many others, because as their daughters are speaking, we do not just want to, we need to hear what the last generation said, and as many stories as we can get down, just for the sheer fact of not of trying to understand not just how big the problem is, but that we can either address it now, or we can let our daughters and our sons try to figure this out. I don't really want to do that. Kristen, is there anything else that you want to do? We have been, I mean, wow, this has been almost 2 hours, and I'm sure you're tired, but is there anything else we can talk about today?
Honestly, I was shocked when I just looked at the time. I can't believe it went by that quick. I mean, yeah. Obviously, we've ran into this so many times. We could probably keep on going for hours and hours. But yeah, I feel like this is a good place to stop. Okay. I feel like I got out a lot of what needed to be spoken about, and I look forward to continuing conversation on this and just really digging in, watching back, and and talking more on these issues. I thank you so much for creating this space, for facilitating this space, for making me feel protected and safe in this space. I just want to note to the viewers that during preparations for this conversation, Chris had me in the forefront of his mind at every decision, every question, every part of developing this conversation. He was most worried about making sure that I felt comfortable and that I felt safe. He did such a great job in facilitating that and making me feel comfortable enough to share my story. And I think that that is something that needs to be noted for other people who try to engage in these kind of conversations. There are so many notes you could take just by, I mean, even during this conversation, if once I look back at it, I know others will probably see it as well. Chris stopped and asked me multiple times, "How are you doing, Kristen? Are you okay? Are you ready to go forward?" And that is so very important. For me, I am so outspoken and so able to tell someone now when I'm uncomfortable. I don't have reservations there. So I almost felt like he was overdoing it at times. But having that sort of protection is what is so needed and desired by victims who are ready to talk. And I think that that definitely needs to be stated and known for future conversations going forward. So Chris, I thank you so much for that. You've been just incredible in our private conversations as well as here. I really appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And that is it's incredibly kind, and I very much appreciate the words and I hope that other people get to see this and get to realize that their story can be heard. I may not be the vehicle for that, but if you reach out, your story, not your story, sure, your story, but you will be cared for. And it might not be in this format. It might be something else. Kristen is here for you. I know that. So here are two. But it's more important to understand that in this space today, you said it was I created the space. Kristen, you created the space. I just respected it. Okay. And I think that's an important thing if you are talking to a survivor, if you're talking to somebody who has lived an existence that you're not understanding, it is their space. They have let you in to that place where it is who they are in their heart. So it is your job then at that point to respect, honor, and make sure that the survivor has everything they need to give this gift. This has been a gift. So Kristen, no, you need to thank yourself.
I knew you were going to turn it around.
I know, right?
Which just further validates everything I said. I knew you were going to do that.
But it's true. And I think that the most important thing is, I do believe, Kristen, is that when somebody comes to you, that you're going to do the same thing because you see how valuable it is. And it always comes back to, how can I help?
Yes.
I don't have a tool. How can I help?